everyone. Welcome to our program. I'm your host, Caitlin Cormier. It can be tough for many Canadians to save money for investing during the best of times. And now, soaring inflation and rising interest rates are making it even more of a struggle. Nearly 75% of Canadians surveyed said their ability to pay for day-to-day expenses has been at least somewhat affected. And that's according to data from Stats Canada published in June 2022. Roughly a quarter of those polled said they dipped into their savings or borrowed money just to make ends meet. Meanwhile, more than half of those surveyed by TD Wealth back in May say they've had to reconsider their investing strategy. Saving seems to be an afterthought for many Canadians given these financial challenges. And that can have significant consequences for their retirement plans. So, we're going to cover some creative ways to save to help our viewers stay on track with their goals. Joining us is Gord Stein, author of Cashflow Cookbook. His book offers 60 suggestions on how to save money each month. Gordon, thank you so much for being here.
That's a real pleasure, Caitlin. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell me, what gave you the inspiration to come up with this Cashflow Cookbook?
Well, I've always been interested in personal finance, and I've always been struck by how much Canadians struggle with their finances. And then along the way, I discovered two or three ideas to reduce the cost of a couple of different items. But the key thing is what I found was ways of doing it with minimal effort and minimal sacrifice. And that got me curious, what else is there? And so then from that, I generated this list. The list grew to $13,000 of monthly savings ideas. Then I got curious, what if you took those savings from each of these ideas, invested it for 10, 20, or 30 years? So the list became a spreadsheet. Took the spreadsheet to my accountant to check the math, and he said, these are great ideas. This will make a great book. And then it became a book, and then it became a Toronto Star newspaper column, and now a full-time speaking career, helping Canadians and Americans with their personal finances.
I love that. And one of the key things you said there is their minimal effort. I think that that's huge. Think of our busy lives and, everyone moving through the day to day. When you say minimal effort, it definitely piques more interest if I don't have to give up too much or it doesn't take too much out of my day to make savings. It sounds fantastic to me. And I think our viewers probably want to know, so how much have you been able to save using these recipes?
I would say right now, I save about $1,000 to $1,500 a month versus what I'd be paying for my complete budget. Now, I would say the savings would be even higher for me back when it was at a time of household formation and raising our three children. So a lot of my expenses have dropped down now as I've aged, quite frankly. I would say for the average person, they're going to look through it. They're going to say, I'm already doing that one. This one doesn't apply to me. But then they'll land on, I would say typically 6 or 7 of the recipes will really resonate with people. And there'll be things that they hadn't even thought of. They're things that they didn't even know that they could, reduce the costs on, or they could do some comparison shopping on. And those ones can really add up. Typically Canadians could see a good $500 a month of savings. I've had lots of people write to me after one of my talks saying, geez, I've been through methodically through the book and freed up $800 to $1,000 a month. So it's very personal, but we can talk about some of those different recipes and see where they sit with our listeners.
Absolutely. And so when we think about kind of saving money and finding ways to kind of cut back on expenses, why do you think that it's most difficult for people to change their spending habits?
Well, I think, first of all, habits are very, very tough things. It's very challenging to change a habit. And if you look at the stats on people with their diet or their exercise and then, trying to maintain those changes in their lifestyle, very, very difficult to do. And money can be extremely emotional to people. We get very attached to some of our money related habits. The latte has certainly been beat up by financial journalists and authors all over the place. And I think those things are not a good place to start because people are emotionally attached to that. It's things they don't want to give up. So the whole premise of Cashflow Cookbook is let's free up some cash flow while giving up nothing. So as an example, if I can reduce the cost of my electricity bill, my gas bill, my home insurance, or any of these other bills, my cell phone monthly bills, if I can lower those costs, how does it change my lifestyle? And the answer is it doesn't change my lifestyle at all. So I think it's great if Canadian consumers can start with some of those kinds of unemotional bills and lower those down each month, start to free up some cash flow, and then they can start to really build their financial wellness in a profound way. So that's, I think, the key place to start.
It's funny that you bring that up about changing lifestyle and, that emotional attachment to the coffee. I think the pandemic has probably highlighted that for a lot of us, that feeling of being able to go out of the house and get your special coffee, it brings you out in the morning, and being able to go see a movie or go to dinner, these things we couldn't do for a long time. So it's really amazing to know that there's ways to cut back with still keeping the lifestyle, because I'm sure a lot of us are probably really excited to be outside and doing things again. So I'm definitely keeping my ears open for these tips to make sure I can save extra money. Okay. One of the hurdles to reducing expenses is time and effort. We talk about this a lot. So how do you try and overcome this challenge with the suggestions in your book?
Yeah, I think one of the criteria I set up is each idea has to save at least $25 a month. Many of them save $200, $300, $400, $500 a month. Again, depends on your personal circumstance, but the absolute criteria is each idea has to be as easy, if not easier, than the way you were doing something before. So if you do some comparison shopping, let's say for your cell phone, yeah, it might take you an hour or two to do the legwork, but then maybe you're able to save $50, $100 a month, and those savings carry on indefinitely. But it's all about finding easier ways of doing things, no more effort, no sacrifice, and start with those kinds of bills. And typically, we all have about a dozen or so of those bills. They're kind of unemotional ones. Probably it's, direct withdrawal out of your checking account every month. So we can make some changes there. Now we start to free up some cash flow. For some people, that means they can make ends meet. For others, hey, there's an opportunity for incremental investment, start to grow their wealth, get some financial peace of mind. And for others, there's an opportunity for them to use that cash flow to pay down their debts. So again, but you want to do it all with minimal effort, minimal sacrifice. That's the key premise.
I don't have any emotional attachment to any of my bills. That's definitely a correct assumption for me. I'm totally happy with them being cut. They can cut as much as they want. So hopefully I think that's probably the case for most of us. So savings is wonderful. So how do you think that we can get people to stay focused, or how do you kind of best try and help people stay focused on taking those savings and kind of building it into that wealth building mindset, as opposed to just having extra free cash every month?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is to get that win. In the book, I call it broiling a bill. We carry lots of Cashflow Cookbook puns throughout. But the idea of broiling a bill, and I think when people take one bill using one of the recipes in the book, they lower that bill. They typically take maybe a half an hour to an hour's worth of work to execute the changes. And when they do that, I think it becomes their own reward. But right away, I talk about savor the savings. So let's say you're able to free up $100 a month by reducing a bill. And then what do you do with $100? So you could leave it sloshing around in your checking account. It's going to get gobbled up by something, and you won't really have any kind of a difference in your wealth. But what I suggest in the book is take that money, and if you're in good shape from a debt perspective, let's commit that right away. Maybe you have a company stock purchase plan, or maybe you have a company-sponsored RSP program where you want to increase your TFSA investments. So right away, you want to lock in that money so you're committed by that same savings every month. Let's say it's $100 a month, it goes in there. So that's the next step. And then where it really starts to come together, I like people setting up what I call a wealth tracker. So wealth, I view that as what you own minus what you owe. So if you put that in a simple chart, and there's some templates on Cashflow Cookbook, there's some great tools with TD. We've got things that we own. So we have a house and a TFSA and an RSP and a company stock purchase plan, and we've got vehicles and all kinds of other assets. And then from that, we're going to subtract what we owe. We've got car loans and mortgages and HELOCs and other kinds of vehicles, credit card balances. And then when you make that simple subtraction, you're going to find out what your wealth is. And if we start to make these changes, we start paying down debts more aggressively through this freed up cash flow, or maybe we're increasing our investments. Now you start to see that wealth grow month after month. And I think once people get to that stage where they've got this wealth tracker, they're seeing their wealth grow over time, now they're going to start thinking a little bit differently about their dinners out and their lattes. But I wouldn't start with those things. Start with these other things. Start to see the wealth grow. Let your money look after you. And then as that balance starts to grow, now you can start thinking differently about all kinds of expenses.
I love that visual aspect of actually seeing the growth, or even using, like you said, a calculator to kind of calculate what that's going to look like long term. And as you mentioned, TD absolutely does have lots of tools available for free online, including personal cash flow calculators, budget creation, retirement tools, and those sorts of things. So for our viewers, definitely check those out to help you with that visualization piece, so you can see what this is actually going to have as an impact on your finances. So I'm ready. Let's get into the kitchen. Let's start cooking with some of your money saving recipes. So there are over 60 in your book, and unfortunately, we only have time for a small serving of that. We can't go through the whole book, we don't have enough time. So let's go through 5 different suggestions and break down what each one could potentially add up to over 10, 20, and 30-year time frames. So let's start with the biggest expense category for many Canadians, which is housing. So gas bills can take a big bite out of our budget. Where can we find some savings?
Yeah, gas is an interesting one because the price of natural gas is rising. All kinds of factors driving that up right now. So people are going to see some shocks in their bills. There's an opportunity to counteract that inflation by saving the cost of home heating. Give you a quick side example. I moved into a 1938 home, and some parts of the house were a little bit drafty, a little bit chilly. I had one door in particular, went from my workroom in the basement into the garage, and I took a look and I saw there's a 3/4 of an inch gap underneath the door on a 30-inch wide door. If you do the arithmetic, engineering background, that's like having a 6-inch hole in the wall. So with about 10 or $12 of Home Depot expense, put in a threshold and some door sweeps, and literally stopped all of that airflow. So that's a great example of looking for those drafts and breezes in your house. You can use a lit stick of incense or some Christmas tinsel or whatever's appropriate, just to try and spot where you might have those air leaks in the house. And that's always the first place to go after. That can make a pretty major difference. You can also look at having a setback thermostat. It's nice to have the bedroom a little bit cooler at night, so you can have a programmable thermostat that's going to turn the furnace down at night and turn it back up again. So there's a couple of ideas. If you actually have to change out windows or furnaces, an opportunity to get some more efficient ones happening there. Another big one is attic insulation. So a lot of older homes, they might only have, this much attic insulation. It's been packed down over time. And depending on where you live, the code might suggest you have something like R30 or R60 up there, which is more like, 2 or more feet of insulation up in the attic. So that's a fairly low cost one-time investment. But if we take an example in the book, I used different servings depending on your personal circumstance. But we talked about saving $42 a month on the gas bill. People might say, well, $42, that's not going to make a huge difference. But if you took the $42 and you were able to invest that, Caitlin, at 7%, over 10 years, that would grow to about $7,000. Over 20 years, it would grow to a pretty remarkable $20,000. And if you go out even further and you get out to, let's say, 30 years, you're up around $50,000 of savings. So these small things make a big difference through the power of time. Just throw in one more quick thing. Sometimes people who are in their 50s will say, well, that's great if you're 25 years old. But if you're 50 years old, the stats would still suggest you're probably going to live to about 85. So even a 50-year-old has a 35-year window to see the savings on these kinds of things. We don't stop everything at age 65, where a lot of people retire.
Maybe stop going to that 9 to 5, but there's still lots of life to be lived for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. So yeah, it's amazing what $42 can turn into. It's shocking, and I've worked in this industry for a long time, and it's still surprising to hear what that amount of money can grow to. Okay, let's move on to another high expense category for lots of Canadians, transportation. So you talked about this a little bit already. The second savings recipe involves changing our driving habits. So how can this help us save money?
There was a great article, and I referenced it in my book, through Edmunds. They did the research. And, we all hear these tips all the time: accelerate more slowly, don't brake unless you have to, slow down your speed limit. And so they asked the question, does this stuff really make a difference? And they called the article, We Test the Tips. The reference is in Cashflow Cookbook if you want to look it up. And what they found is that these kinds of changes in driving styles, simple changes, can save about 35%. So if you think about, the typical reaction in Canada when gas prices started to rise, people say, "Oh, I can't afford it. My gas prices have gone up by 30%." Well, why not counteract that? And it was interesting. I did my own little experiment. I drive back and forth a lot between Canada and the US as I do different kinds of speaking engagements in the two countries. And I did an experiment driving once between Toronto and Cleveland. And I drove for an hour at 100 kilometers an hour. And then I drove for another hour at 110 and another hour at 120 kilometers an hour. And I was curious, what would be the difference? And each time I reset the fuel economy meter on my vehicle to see what kind of a difference it would make. Well, the difference between 100 kilometers an hour, or actually it was 105, between 105 kilometers an hour and 120 was a 45% difference in fuel consumption. And this was
Wow.
there was no wind that day. It's a pretty flat drive if you've done the drive from Toronto to Cleveland, Ohio. And it was really interesting to see that big of a difference, even bigger than what Edmunds had found in their research. So simple changes, when you're driving on the highway, sometimes you'll see all the red lights ahead as people hit their brakes. And maybe you're, 100 meters away from the next vehicle. People tend to hit their brakes right away. But maybe you could just coast for a bit and see if you actually need to brake, because very often the traffic picks up again and you're able to drive much more smoothly. If you have cruise control in the vehicle, you can use that. So these kinds of simple tips, I've tested them personally and lots of great research out there. There's a good 35% savings opportunity. Of course, your savings could vary.
I make a drive from Nova Scotia to Ontario a couple times a year, so I will take note of that. Don't go faster just because it makes the drive go quicker. Go slower, save money. I'll note that. So, how much money could this actually grow into if we invested with these reformed driving habits?
Yeah, this is just looking at simple future value arithmetic. You can use lots of online calculators to try it for yourself. But again, we talked about a $50 savings making a handful of these changes. Again, people will want to work their own numbers, but if you could free up $50 a month, we're going to invest that again at 7%. Taking that $50 monthly savings over 10 years, that would be savings of $8,600. Now, if we stretch that out over 20 years, we're talking about $26,000. And if we had those kinds of savings in place, so saving $50 a month over a total of 30 years, we would end up with more than $60,000 in our TFSA or in our RSP. So really remarkable, simple changes.
It's really starting to add up. Just so far, we've only talked about two categories and it's already really starting to add up. Okay, number 3, let's dig in. Food and beverage, that grocery list. So preparing a grocery list rather than shopping spontaneously, how can that help to curb excessive spending?
Yeah, the research would suggest you can save about 10%. And again, individual results may vary, but there's very simple things at the grocery store that we can do. And so the grocery list one is a really important one. Most grocery stores also have, Caitlin, a loyalty program. So where I shop for our groceries, it takes 10 minutes to sign up for it. A little card that goes in my wallet. We scan our groceries when we buy them. And at the particular store that we use, it shows the running savings that you have by just having the card. So this was 10 minutes of investment to get the card. The most recent one, I just checked it because I knew we were going to be doing this session, $1,185 in the last 12 months savings
Wow.
on groceries. We did nothing,
Wow.
nothing whatsoever. That's the savings just by flashing our card. We have to buy these groceries anyway, obviously. It's remarkable. And pretty much every grocery store has a program of that sort. So again, all about minimal effort, minimal sacrifice. People say, oh, you should drive around to 4 grocery stores and clip coupons. I mean, you can if you want. I think that's way too much work. So walking with a grocery list, pre-plan a little bit, think about a little bit about some meal planning ideas, scan your grocery loyalty card, and you're on the way to savings. So, just on the grocery list itself, the examples that we set out in the book, we talked about a $28 monthly saving. And again, we're going to invest that over time. Is that a big deal? Well, the numbers, again, they start to add up. After 10 years, we're talking about nearly $5,000. And over 20 years, $15,000. 30 years, another $34,000. So even just what we've talked about already, we've easily added $150,000 to our wealth over time.
That's really eating into our expenses there.
Look
I'm
at you
trying the
go.
puns. I don't. I'm
I'm bringing
trying.
you on as a co-author next book.
Sounds good. I'll keep brushing up on them. Okay, fourth recipe. This one for household expenses. So you suggest making major purchases at the opposite time of year than most consumers would. So how can this help bring out some savings?
There's so many opportunities for this, and there's some great tools online. I mentioned a bit about it in Cashflow Cookbook. There's actually a best month to buy each thing that you might want to buy. People know about, the white sale on linens in January, but every single thing that we would want to get, there's a best month to buy it. And some would be as you'd expect. I got a great deal on a snowmobile, not a snowmobile, a snow blower in, I think it was May. There was only a couple of snow blowers left at the Home Depot in this case. The snow was long gone, and they were certainly in a mood to sell a snowblower, and they threw in free financing for a year, which why not? So those kinds of opportunities. Some of them are less obvious. Vacuum cleaners are great to buy in December. Kitchen appliances tend to be cheaper in September. So different kinds of opportunities. Of course, there's Cyber Monday and Black Friday and Boxing Day and some of those kinds of things for deals as well. But it's really all about, on the spend side, we just want to slow down a little bit. We want to do a little bit of research. We want to do some price comparison shopping. And we want to take a look at this, best month to buy, this kind of contrarian shopping behavior. And often these are on really big ticket things. It can also hold on things like cars. If you're out in the lot in January and they're scraping the snow off and you're there on the 30th of the month where they're trying to make their month, you're going to cut a way better deal than you would in July.
Wow. Yeah, that's significant. I had no idea that appliances were cheaper in September. So again, that's another thing I'll keep noted for myself for savings. Okay, so we've pulled back our shopping behavior. We've made some changes to when we buy things. So how can this help us create more savings when it's invested over time?
The same sort of thing. I mean, these future value factors are the same. So in this case, I used in the book an example of $100 a month. You can take a look at what that might mean to you as an individual. But over 10 years, at 7%, investing in that $100 a monthly, that adds up to $17,000. It's $52,000 after 20 years. If you go all the way to 30 years, that's $122,000. Now, again, notice our lifestyle doesn't change at all. We get a little bit smarter. We plan in advance. What is it we want to buy over the next year? There's all these kinds of opportunities. And when we talk about this 30-year notion, to our 25-year-old listeners, that means that 55 years old, if they were able to replicate the kinds of numbers that we're talking about, by now we're probably talking about an extra $250,000 of wealth. So these things make a huge, huge difference. They're very subtle. You're going about your career, you're doing your thing, you're enjoying your life, but you're just getting a little bit smarter, a little bit more mindful on your spending right across the board. So those numbers are sure adding up as we work our way through all of us, Caitlin.
Yes, yeah, they're stacking up one after the other, that's for sure. I'll be excited to see what it looks like at the end. Let's keep things cooking on high with a recipe to scale back on financial fees. Your fifth saving suggestion is to comb through one's credit score. How can this help us save?
This one's really interesting because we're not giving up anything whatsoever. We're not cutting back. We're not reducing anything. People should take the time to get to know their credit score. And depending on where you live in Canada, it can save on three major areas. Pretty much across the country, it can save on loan interest. The better your credit score, the better interest rates you're going to get. And the swing can be massive. A lot of credit reports, if you go in and look at your own, very common to find errors in there. They still show you as having credit cards that you got rid of a long time ago. They may have incorrect numbers right across the board. So people may be getting penalized on their credit score. But it's worthwhile to learn a little bit more about credit score. It sounds kind of intrinsically boring, but when you think about the savings, it suddenly becomes quite interesting. And so these credit scoring companies, they'll look at a variety of different things. They'll look at your payment history, your credit use, how long you've had credit, the mix of the different kinds of loans that you have, and how many applications you've had for new credit. So you can get a little bit smarter about all of these things, lower your credit utilization, make sure everything's paid off on time. Make those changes and start to rise up that credit score over time because it makes a big difference. In the US and in some parts of Canada, it can also affect your house insurance rates and even your car insurance rates. So you got to look at that on a province by province basis, but that can add even more opportunities for savings. So this one's so interesting. It's so stealthy. Most of us don't even think about what's our credit score. So we have no idea where it's at, but this can be really quite significant. If you had a situation with a really large mortgage and let's say you had 2 vehicle loans on the go, this could actually make a difference of hundreds of dollars a month.
Yeah, just being more mindful of their credit score, like you said, just kind of taking a peek at it. I'm sure most Canadians haven't even seen what their credit bureau looks like, haven't even requested a copy of their credit bureau. So we take that, we add it into the pot. And so improving our credit score, what is that looking like? Give us one last look at what that looks like as far as our savings.
Again, we've assigned $65 a month to this. This is something you can look at it yourself. Go look at your own credit score, get the errors removed, work on improving the score. Then you may want to go back and reshop your loans in some parts of Canada, home insurance, car insurance, vehicle loans, etc. But at the $65 a month number that we talked about, over 10 years, that's about $11,000. We talk about 20 years invested at 7%, $34,000. And at over 30 years, that same amount invested monthly adds up to nearly $80,000. So we can see all of these things, and probably most of the people listening today are listening to each of these things saying, geez, I never even thought about looking at that. Or people get to retirement, they say, I don't have anywhere near enough money. But had they made these changes much earlier in their career, and never too late to start, they could be sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars of incremental investment capital.
And even if they're on a fixed income, just to reduce expenses, period, right? To live better within their means, right? Same sort of idea. Okay, let's take the menu. We're going to take all the things that we've gone through so far. Let's have the final reveal. We're going to take the cover off of this beautiful meal. So what is it going to look like? How much potential wealth creation could we have with this recipe with this menu we've gone through today?
Yeah, again, it depends so much on the individual, Caitlin, but not unusual. People adding up all of these things can add hundreds of thousands of dollars or even $1 million or $1.5 million to their wealth. So, we'll show you a bit of an animated graph of what that looks like over time. In Cashflow Cookbook, the first part of the book, we look at a couple and they make a handful of changes similar to what we're talking about. They're 40 years old and their projection is they're able to add $1.5 million to their wealth at retirement. So the reader can take a look at Eric and Keisha, as we call them in the book, and they can say, hey, this is similar to what I have, or this is different, or actually I could save more here or save less there. And in the book, I show you the simple math, and you can do your own projections to see how much all of these things can save you out over time.
The power of compounding as well becomes completely clear when we can see the effects over time. And I'm sure that so many people in our audience are ready to just get started right away. We're going to have to leave our conversation there, Gordon. Thank you so much for sharing these recipes with us. You've given our viewers plenty to chew on as they look for ways to curb their own spending and boost their investing potential. And of course, there are so many more recipes to consider in your Cashflow Cookbook. And for those of you that are interested in learning more, definitely grab a copy of that and read through. Any final words for our viewers when it comes to savings?
I think there's a great opportunity for everybody to start. I think the place to start is pick one bill, pick one expense, use the ideas in Cashflow Cookbook, reduce that, get that money working for you. And again, it might be about making ends meet right now in these tough times. It might be about more money for investment, more money for paying down debt. But you can take that first step and start to build yourself a much, much more secure financial future. Thanks so much, Caitlin.
Oh, that sounds wonderful to me. And it's just such a great time for us to be talking about these ways to save money. So thank you so much for sharing it with us. I personally benefited from this conversation as well. So those in our audience, make sure to register for upcoming live webinars and check out our library of on-demand content available in the Learning Center and on our YouTube page. We'll see y'all next time.